right, welcome back everybody to Digital Marketing Masterclass, the podcast series where we keep pace with the ever-changing, ever-shifting landscape of digital marketing with fresh insights from thought leaders who thrive by creating amazing content that converts. I'm your host, Chris Carr, and we have a very special guest today, Mr. Kevan Lee. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So what I want to do now is just kind of give a quick intro to who Kevin is, and we're gonna dive right in. So Kevin, here's what I'd like to do. Today's show is entitled "The 7 Habits of Highly Ineffective Digital Marketers." You've had a ton of time to prep. You jumped on about 3 minutes ago, and I threw this in front of you, and now you're. Hopefully, we can do this on the fly, but
we'll be fine. I've been an ineffective digital marketer for years, so I have lots of experience to draw from. So it'll be good.
That's great. That's great. So one of the things that you're gonna, if you didn't get this from the intro, one of the things I think that Kevin's going to bring a lot of value from is just the work experience that he had at Buffer and now at Oyster. And so what we're going to try to do is walk through some of these topics, but we're also going to try to include some life experience with this stuff, and we're really excited to go. So let's dive in. So when I think of the 7 habits of highly ineffective marketers, I think one of the number one things that I have witnessed is usually in the discovery phase, where we're sort of talking about who is the target audience, who is the buyer personas. So when you think about that, where do you feel like people get that wrong?
Yeah, so I guess in my experience in tech, that like the most important thing you can get to is product market fit. And I think that's a wonderful metric and aim to aspire to, and obviously sets you up for success in a lot of ways. I think when you're doing that, oftentimes you're like under-investing in marketing at that stage where you're looking for product market fit. You're kind of scrambling just to find that initial traction. And I think you then kind of save the actual discovery, ideal customer profile, buyer persona, whatever you call it within your company today. Like that often is not the first thing that you do when you're creating something. Like you're kind of iterating and changing, and you get to that place organically because you have to, but it's not as robust or systematized as you might like it to be. And so I think that's one of the things in that early discovery stage where you might have it in your head, or you might have this loose idea of who you're serving or what their core needs are, but the faster you can articulate that, write it down, and operationalize it within your team, I think the faster then you can run at that from a sales-led perspective, from a product-led perspective, from messaging. Like it all kind of filters back to that core person and that core job that you're speaking to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What I find is that a lot of people dive right in and they haven't taken really time to, we use an expression like to measure twice and cut once.
Yes.
And they get their hands real dirty and then they find out, 4 months later, oh, I should have done it this way or something like that. They really didn't get the data before they started. And then, it's one of those things where unless you got really lucky, you're hoping that your hunches got you there. And that I've just found that sort of never works. We do a nerdy thing here. We literally, when we take on a new client, the first 10 weeks is heavy discovery. Like literally that's the book that we give to our clients.
Wow.
It's called a gap assessment. It takes about 10 weeks. I put like six employees on there, and we're going to break down all the gaps, the opportunities, everything like that. We're really heavy into the research and discovery. And then that book will sort of be like a Bible for the next 3 to 5 years. It has this interactive scorecard to make sure as we turn the dials and stuff like that things are working, and it's kind of like a 3 or 5 year roadmap. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I've been on the sales process for years where I would just literally hear someone's problems and then I would go into a piece of software, confirm their problems, and then send them a proposal for like $100,000. You know what I mean? It's kind of like getting like heart surgery after like from your, because your primary care doctor says, yeah, you'd be a good candidate for it.
Not super effective. Yeah. I think that the data point's so good too, because data is often one of those things that gets pushed down, like you kick the can down the road a bit as well.
Yeah,
like
sure.
you know your business intuitively, or you're too busy running at other things. But really data is the thing that's going to should be the thing informing your decisions. It should be the thing driving your strategy. But it's seldom the thing you invest in first. And so when I think about how to build a marketing team at Buffer and at Poly, which is the company I worked at Oyster, where I am today, usually the roles that we hire for first are more on the product marketing side, just because we have, we're working in SaaS and we're working in the tech industry, and so there's a big emphasis on product. But what we're looking for from a mindset perspective is someone who understands data. Like that first hire, the second hire, needs to be either someone who's data oriented or like maybe even a pure marketing operations person, someone who can install that foundation layer so you can then make everything else that you're doing more effective.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that you can do, and even if you don't have your own data to kind of use, there's enough industry data that as long as your business isn't so incredibly disruptive, you know what I mean? If you're first to market, that's a challenge, but not impossible. But 9 times out of 10, if you don't have your own data, there's a lot of just industry data, looking at competitors and stuff like that to figure out what's working and what's not. And
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? It's just, I'd rather start from a place where data was the genesis of creation, as opposed to like throw it against the wall, see what sticks, try to get some, you know what I mean? Like there's better ways to do it now. And I think technology has bridged that gap better than ever.
Yeah. And it's interesting, at Buffer, we had a strong, I guess you could call it an intuition culture, which seems really scary to label it that way. But I think what I observed was that intuition is a form of data, or it's birthed from data. Like we were so close to the product, we were in it every day, we were talking to customers every day, that we didn't have to pull up a mixed panel dashboard or hop into a competitive intelligence tool to know intuitively what we were seeing in the business. And so I think there's, if you're operating at a certain scale, sometimes those insights are just so evident. But it's important then to, when you're coming up with plans or creating a spec or a project brief, that there's an element of there that is data oriented. So we often would phrase that as a hypothesis. We say, if we do X, Y, Z, then this action will happen because of this data point that we've observed in the past, or we've observed from the market or our competitors. And so bringing that third piece of that if-then statement in was really useful for us.
Wow. That's actually really, really smart. Yeah. Now, let's, just because I could probably stay in number 1 forever, let's move on to number 2.
Yeah.
Which is highly ineffective digital marketer doesn't understand or put enough time into their own website. Do you see that a lot?
Oh yeah, I'm guilty of that for sure. I think the set it and forget it mentality is very dangerous with a website, but it's also very tempting and easy. Like you get a great V1 of your website up, and then there's other fires to put out in other places of the business, and that's good enough. I think for us, like, your website, if you're a digital company, is your storefront. Like it's the first impression everyone sees. It's going to be your highest impact area, given the volume and attention and traffic that you're driving to it. And so it's worth over investing in that website. I think the other thing we see, like, yes, if you set it and forget it, you're not evolving your positioning and your messaging and experimenting and continually improving. But I think one of the bigger challenges for us is that, we would have a website that said one thing, but internally we were having conversations or shifting our core persona or shifting our target audience. And then the website was like playing catch up like months later, which is not ideal because the whole business has already shifted and the website has not. And so finding a way to make that a closer connection is really key.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, I think one of the things, I have 2 different comments on the website category. Like, one of the funny things that I'm never this brazen in the sales experience, but in my head when I'm kind of like playing the hero story and I go into your conference room and I totally wow you, 9 times out of 10, people are saying, oh, you know what, I just need SEO. And I'm like, so let's say hypothetically I can do that for you and I can bring tons of traffic to your website. Like, what are they going to see when they get there? You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
If your bucket has a lot of holes in it, I'm not so sure that we just want to start, pouring a ton of water into it. You know what I mean? Like you're going to get a much better experience if you make at least your homepage have a really core argument and it's really tight and people know what your unique selling proposition is, and that they're at the right place. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's one of those things where I'm just like, you know what? If people spend as much time and energy on figuring out where people are going to land as opposed to just generate leads, I think that people would have dramatically different results from their marketing.
Totally. And I think one thing, just to follow up on that we observed, if you're driving SEO traffic to your page, one of the key signals then for the search engines is, do people stay on that page? Or are they just bouncing and coming right back? Because if they're bouncing, that's going to make your SEO efforts so much harder. And so you're kind of in this vicious cycle if you're just, flooding an SEO play into this website that you're not really acting on and making sure that you're optimizing for, because all that traffic's going to bounce and it's just going to make all your SEO even harder to rank over time. And so it's interesting. You have to think of both ends in that way.
Yeah. And I think the other things that you want to be able to do, at least I recommend to all my clients, I try to make them understand that the website that's the most useful to your visitors is going to win every time. And what I mean by that is that we try to do this thing called quasi. When quasi it just basically means questions with answers and simple information. So what I want to be able to do is, people have questions, but they don't want a novel. So I want to be able to give them a bite-sized portion, and then it has read more information that can give them the longer information. I find that a lot of websites they try so hard to look sexy, but they don't provide the depth of information, and they lose them in that direction. Or they care nothing about design and usability, and they just overload them with information, and then people are like, dude, I'm not going to read all that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like the Goldilocks problem. It's like too hot, too cold. You want it just right in the middle. Yeah.
You know who does, do you know a guy named Andy Crestodina?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone knows Andy, it sounds like. He was on the show, and he said something that, like, I was like, that is so brilliant. But then I went to my writing team, and they're like, we're not doing that. And here's what it was. Every scroll depth, he had a diagram or a piece of information so that you could never not see a diagram on or a picture or something like that. You know what I mean? And so he basically said on the show, he's like, I always try to think that how close the back button is from everyone's user experience. You know what I mean? But I'm like, if you do 2,000 words, those diagrams, it takes a lot of time.
It does.
But that's why Andy's Andy, right? Because he's that guy that just can do it.
Yeah. I think we often think about, this touches a bit on content strategy, but if we think about it from a website perspective, like quality over quantity, I think, is an interesting one to consider. So when we look at I would recommend for folks to go look at your Google Analytics stats, and typically you're going to see probably like an 80-20 rule in there, where most of your traffic's going to come from just a small number of your pages. And so those are the pages then to really focus on and to wring even more value out of, rather than building out the long tail. Yes, there's a point where the long tail does become helpful, especially from an SEO side. But I think when it comes to like the core website, like, understand what your core pages are and make sure those are the best they can be.
Yeah. And what we were finding with our core content is we had one blog that was 70% of our traffic. And it's huge. It really worked out. But the content on the page was outdated, and it was just, I don't know how to describe it. It was like, I put so much energy into almost the same topic on like a pillar page that was getting no visits, and yet this old 600-word blog was getting tons of traffic. So I had this like very weird thing of just like, I don't want anybody to read it. But then I went and added length to it, and our rankings actually dropped.
Oh, wow.
It stunk. Yeah. Because sometimes just amplifying it, right? Like, you have to know what wires you're cutting. And so there's a definite balance to that.
Absolutely.
However, I would do it again. What I mean by that is getting tons of traffic to a page that just doesn't represent your brand, your message, or is just out of date doesn't do you any good either. Because it wasn't leading from there to other pages of the website that were actually going to be meatier and stuff like that. You know what I mean? They were going to that and bouncing. Yeah. And so,
yeah, that's true. Well, and like to follow that thread, so if we were to go from like website being one of the habits of a highly ineffective digital marketer to then SEO being like the third habit. So if we're thinking of SEO, I think for us at Buffer, one of the big lessons there was that like, we never hired an SEO person in the whole time I was there. So I was doing SEO and writing the content.
Yeah.
So I think for me, one of the things that was kind of scary over time, like we had a period where traffic just took a giant nosedive, and like none of us were technical SEO people. So we were like, what happened? Because SEO was our primary distribution method.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the lessons from that is that the SEO is it can be a very fraught place if you're trying to, not that you're trying to game it, but if you're trying to pull levers that you don't fully understand or know, I think it can lead to some problems. I think you can get some like false positives where maybe something takes off and you're like, oh, we'll just do more of that. But it's such a complicated strategy that it does require some knowledge of what you're doing. I think for us, we played it pretty safe. We had an SEO plugin within our WordPress setup, the Yoast plugin. We just did the best practices there, and they would tell us if we did well or not, and that served us really well. I think anything beyond that, I was very afraid I would break something, and I did break things at times. And so just understanding there's importance to the structure, the overall way you think about architecting it, and that in and of itself is maybe like 80% of the lift to get where you want to be on the SEO side.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head. Number 3, when we're talking about the habits of ineffective marketers, is SEO. And I would agree, like it's one of those things that I recently wrote a blog. It was the idea or the concept was don't build your house on sand. What I mean by that is we're doing it anyway, but I'm trying to like coach people that a lot of times we're trying to succeed on our own marketing on platforms that we don't entirely own. You know what I mean? And you one SEO algorithm change away from, just your results plummeting. Social media, the origin of social media, like if you had followers to Facebook, 40 to 60% of people were seeing every post that you did until it went down to like a whopping 3%.
Yeah.
And then it platform by platform just basically can change the rules of the game, whether you like it or not. So then when Apple comes in and does this privacy policy recently, you know what I mean? That's taking a total bite out of remarketing on Facebook and other platforms. Like that wasn't entirely a surprise for me in the aspect of, you know what? Like we don't own these platforms. Like we rely on them, but they can change the game at any time. And so you have to one, own your audience. In other words, find ways to get people into your database, because if another platform sort of owns them, you know what I mean? Like if an algorithm change happens, you can't guarantee that you can get the right message to them, or they're going to charge you through the nose to do it. Other things, you got to rely on your brand, and then you also have to diversify your approach so that, you know what, like you don't wake up one day and you just have all your eggs in one basket and it's only in SEO or it's only in social media or paid ads and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's very true. I think that like for us at Buffer, that was community was the big thing. And so whether that community was tied to our brand, it was tied to our mission, our product, what we were doing. And so it was less so tied to Facebook or a Twitter chat or all these different things that kind of were like dust in the wind over the course of 5 or 6 or 7 years. I remember one time in particular, I think it was Google's AMP, their AMP product rolled out. And so for us, like our content then, when it was viewed on a mobile phone, which is, half of our traffic, 70% of our traffic, all of our CTAs were stripped out, and it was just like, here's the content. And so you have to move fast with stuff like that. It was like, we have to adapt and think, SEO for us is, yes, it's a big driver of signups and conversion, but it's also a driver of our brand awareness, our word of mouth. Like we're delivering content and answering questions and solving problems for people through this content, not just selling them on what Buffer does. And I think that in and of itself was core to our brand and our community. And so yes, SEO was still a useful channel because we were establishing Buffer as this authority within the space, regardless of whether our CTAs were on there or not, regardless of how the algorithm changed. And if, all of a sudden we're getting our content's just in an answer box on the page and no one's clicking through anymore, like they're still getting that little hit of Buffer being the one answering the questions, which was useful for us.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I thought that you guys did really well at Buffer, or at least from what I saw from when you were on Pam Didner's podcast, was you guys really dumped a lot of time and energy into guest posting strategies.
Right.
Can you unpack that again, just if you want to tell that story again?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So this started just before I joined. One of our co-founders ran this for us, and it was huge. It was like our initial traction channel. So like content marketing via a guest posting strategy. So we were writing for our own blog just as we were building up our authority and
Yeah.
domain rank and all that stuff there. But in order to really boost that, it was then guest posting. So it was,
Yeah.
I think he probably had 2 or 3 guest posts per week on different sites around the web, which is a wild volume and like very dynamic.
Yep.
And the way we went about it, you go about it strategically. And so, you look at, you're not just trying to like spray and pray to any blog out there. Like you're thinking strategically about, we want to have a guest post on Social Media Examiner. We want to have a guest post on Convince and Convert, like all these different core sites, and then like a long tail of sites. And then what we did is we would pitch an idea, saying like, we have this article ready. It's written. This is the title. This is what it's about. If they say yes, then we'll go and write it real fast and send it over to them.
Yeah.
So like, we don't want to. I guess the ask is not. We are social media experts. Can we write for you? It is. Here is something we will give to you of value along these lines. So they have a specific picture. It would just shorten the time cycle of everything. It led to higher like acceptance rates on blogs. It was great. And then the way that we engineered the content then was Buffer would always be, part of the story in one way. There'd be like a backlink back to us that helped with our our SEO, helped with our brand awareness, helped with signups, conversions, all that good stuff. So it worked really well.
Were you finding that they were actually leaving the original website and going to your website, or was that just ancillary? I mean, I found just in our approach when we do that the backlink is most of why I'm doing it. Like if I get traffic to leave their site to go to mine, that's awesome. But for the most part,
it was about 50-50, and I think it depends on what type of content we were writing. So we ended up writing a lot of listicles, and so it'd be like, the best ways to save time on social media, and then Buffer would be one of those. And so like it's a very like when you think of the buyer journey, like that's a very close to purchase conversation. And so I think in that case, yes, we saw traffic come over, but more or less it was backlink focused, especially when we then syndicated our content to a Fast Company or a Time or something like that. Much fewer clicks, but really valuable SEO juice from backlink.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very different thing because like you just said, like the closest to purchase it moves the needle a bit quicker when you know that I'm going to click I'm going to click from this website, go to Buffer, and then know, hey, you know what, I might be able to buy a product or service. Like for us as an agency, nobody clicks there and says, hey, maybe I should just hire this agency today. You know what I mean? And so there's the urgency is just a very different thing. So some people will click to find out, does Faratech have a blog, or how do they communicate? But I don't know. So much of that buyer's intent doesn't exactly originate from, hey, you know what, this was on Forbes, and now I'm going to go find this agency. It's like,
exactly.
I'm hoping to try to sound as smart as possible on Forbes so that they remember the name and the brand. And then in the ideal sense, I find ways to kind of get my brand in front of them. You know what I mean? It's the play is a little bit different, but the main reason why I try to get out and try to be everywhere is because of backlinks. I mean, it's just
totally. I think that's great.
What you were saying with SEO about like you tweak certain things on your website and it's possible either an algorithm change happens or a result plummets. If you have decent backlinks, even when the world's on fire, I find that if the backlinks are not, if they're legit, that your rankings hold.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong about that, but in my experience, backlinks are still the golden goose.
Oh yeah, I think that's 100% true. Yeah, I think the other thought on guest posting for us is, and content strategy overall, I think one of the things that we consider is like, what is the next action we want someone to take from this piece of content? And it's not always like a click through back to our site to sign up. Oftentimes it is, but maybe it is, if we're doing a thought leadership piece from our founder, maybe it's to follow our founder on social media, or if it's, something about our culture, maybe it's a link back to our jobs page. When I think about how I consume content on the web, if there's something really interesting that I'm reading, a signal of that is like how many tabs I opened in the course of reading that content. So like that's like something really engaging for me. Is like, oh, I want to know more about this and this and this, and if we can like bring that same perspective into the content that we're writing rather than just here's something to think about and then they leave and go wherever. I think trying to like create journeys off of each piece of content is something that proves really valuable for us.
Yeah. I love how you said that. You know what I mean about what's next, because I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like I feel like one of the challenges that I sort of have is that not I have, but that I see is that I break a buyer's journey down into 3 different categories, usually like awareness, consideration, and decision level content. And it's like I'm shocked at how many times that people don't want to finish either. Well, I'll call it a funnel, but they won't finish the journey. So they'll create a really strong piece of awareness content, and then the buyer has to make this leapfrog to a contact us, and the journey is too far. Do you know what I mean? Like they're dipping their toe in, and now you're asking them to convert. And from a product or service like we have, that buying decision is a 90-day decision. You know what I mean? It's not.
It needs
it's
a
not
nurture.
Like one of those quick things. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. But like if you read an awareness focused piece of content, but all the CTAs are sign up now or talk to sales, like it's not going to work. you gotta be a little different with it. I think so. We used WordPress and we used Ghost as CMSs for us at Buffer. We use Webflow at Oyster. We used HubSpot at Poly. So that there's a ton of different ones. But what we found was really helpful is you can categorize different posts with. You can have hidden categories if you want, so you can even label them like awareness, consideration, purchase. And then within the template files themselves, you can create different CTAs that automatically appear on those posts based on the tags that we have. And so it's kind of like a way to, because I would always forget to update CTAs myself, especially when you get to content at scale. It's like there's a way to automate it or systemize it through the software. That worked really well for us.
Yeah. Ironically, my team still does them manually, which is
bless them.
It's a total pain in the neck. So, I'm like downloading sitemaps, looking at our CTAs, and then we have a spreadsheet of how the CTAs have value, and then you're like sort of going back, and it's like it's surgery about 3 to 4 times a year. It sucks.
Well, good for you doing it 3 to 4 times a year. I think that's one of the ineffective mistakes is not doing it at all or not doing it often enough. So
yeah. Well, I think I'm always like kind of tinkering and stuff like that in my mind. But there's these like small little tinkering, and then there's the large scale. Like it's like when my wife and I literally got. Do they have the Bagster out where you're from? Where are you located? I forgot.
No, I'm in Idaho.
Do you know what the Bagster is? The Bagster is a dumpster in a bag. And essentially, imagine a huge bag you leave on your driveway, and as opposed to spending $400 for a dumpster to sit in your driveway, it's just literally like a huge bag. But the bag is super sturdy, and it literally you schedule a call, and a big truck comes and it lifts up the bag, and it basically it's almost like lifting up a dumpster, but it's just lifting up a bag. And my wife and I put 2 dates on our calendar every year to just declutter our house. It sounds very weird because we should just be throwing things out, all the time, but we're like,
it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
No.
And that's how sort of marketing works, right? Like if you got to be consistent, but then you wake up one day and you're like, I have to overhaul like my CTAs or something like that. And
totally. Same thing with strategic thinking. I think you get on this treadmill with marketing, especially on the content strategy side where you got to produce, you got to write, you got to publish, and it's very hard to take a step back then. And to your point, like historical optimization or cleaning up CTAs or even planning strategy, evolving strategy for the next quarter or something. So you almost have to schedule it in a way.
And you know what my trick has been? I'm doing it right now. So what I was doing is I was spending tons of time on research and like trying to figure out like life stories or other journeys from companies and stuff like that. And then I started to say, what if I found the smartest guy at that company and then pose the question to him and let him talk? And then I have to do less research because I have people like you on the line that are going to spoon feed the answer. And then my blogs. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a great
cuts my research down by like 30%.
And then you can publish your research in the form of a podcast or video. Yeah. Amazing.
Yep. The other thing that I do is that I'll take this podcast, this interview, and then I cut it into as many pieces that are logical to have. And then I essentially say, hey, this is a topic on the mistakes people make when they do SEO. And then I'm going to have Kevin Lee, and I'm going to have Mark Schaefer, and I'm going to have Chad Pollitt, and I'm going to have Andy. And so I make like crowdsourced blog, or I forget what, there's another name for it. But I have it in video format so that when I need to create content at speed, not only am I going to have to find 5 really strong thought leaders, but I'm also going to have 5 people that have a social following that are going to help me build audience as well.
Yeah. Fantastic.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah,
but
I think that's great.
But it's not, it sounds easy, but it's hard, because the things that I don't want to do is re-listen to our interview over and over again and cut it into pieces. It takes about 2 hours to re-listen to this, cut it, figure out where it goes, and stuff like that. So I have people on my team that slowly but surely are just refining that process.
It's good to have a team. I think one of the things I learned early on is, or I heard this, is that you're supposed to spend 50% of your time creating your content and 50% of your time promoting it. Yeah. And I don't think I've ever got that ratio right, but one of the ways of promoting it then is taking what you've created and repurposing it and slicing and dicing. Like, to your point, like there's the creation of it, but then what do you do with that? How many different ways can you use that? Because it's a much better way to scale when you're not having to recreate everything from scratch.
So it's kind of a combination of promotion as a little bit of the affiliate marketing. So when I try to create my argument, I also try to find movers and shakers that are already, that are constantly swimming, that have that credibility and have a social following. And we share audiences.
Yeah,
because
that's
ideally
fantastic.
they share their content.
And from a B2B perspective, like, we do that with co-marketing. So we'll partner with MailChimp, and Buffer and MailChimp co-produce a ebook or white paper, and both audiences get to promote it. You get that cross-pollination. So it's a really effective strategy.
That's cool. That's cool. Have you ever done what I haven't gotten to is like buying the opportunity to be on people's lists. You know what I mean? Like email lists and stuff like that. Have you done that?
Yeah, it falls under sponsorships for us. So we think of it like same thing with event sponsorships or things like that. So at Buffer, we sponsored a whole community once, which was a fun thing to do. And so got our, it was this community brought to you by Buffer, sponsored by Buffer. At Oyster, we're sponsoring some email newsletters in the HR space. And so you get, a little plug, but you also, newsletters today are so robust and fancy. There's like a newsletter plus this radio show plus, it's just like a media company more or less. And so you get both the newsletter plus all these other aspects too. So it's been effective. I think we think of it kind of like display advertising in terms of how we measure it. And so it's very brand focused. We don't expect a lot of like direct ROI from it, but we expect it to be hopefully a touch point in the attribution journey for us.
Yeah. That's great. So I think we slipped into issue number 4 was content strategy.
I think
the mistakes that people made. Yeah. I think they all cross-pollinate each other, and so it's like hard to actually keep it organized. One of the things that I was finding with content strategy is something that we call RAM, which is random acts of marketing. So you go and you write content, and then something else happens, everything from a trade show to seasonality to whatever, and then you stopped writing, and you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things that consistency has to be a crucial part of what you do and how you pump out content. You were telling a story at Buffer that you were at any given time you were writing 3 different articles at one time. Is that?
Yes. Yeah. 3 a day.
How did that work?
It wasn't as bad as it sounds. it was. So I had this system where I'd be researching one article, I'd be writing a second article, and then I would be editing and fine tuning and publishing a third. And so it was kind of like a waterfall effect, but also they were in tandem. And so, the post I was researching one day would then go to the next stage the following day of editing or of writing, and then the third day would be editing and publishing. And so it was a really effective strategy. I think for me with writing, we wanted to have a certain cadence, and the worst stuff I wrote was the stuff I wrote like in one day without giving it time to breathe and sit and reflect. Like I got so like in the groove. And so giving it like that would end up having like a full day or 2 days sometimes to make sure I'm saying what I intend to say and answering everything the right way. And
Yeah.
it proved really effective. So we were able to do, 4 or 5 posts a week, like 2,000 word articles.
Yeah. So some of the things that I've been doing recently is just when I think about writing, and this is something that is also part of my SEO strategy, is I used to like try to pump out new content.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to do a little bit less new, but take the time that I would have spent to write new stuff and go back and add more content to old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I found that the numbers were significantly higher to get something that was already on page 1 to get them from spot 7 to spot 3 was of more value than creating fresh new content that would just get to spot number 7.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That makes
And
complete
so,
sense.
Yeah, but it's hard because you don't know whether you're not at page 3 because of you haven't given enough time to cook. So you're kind of just like watching your keywords like up and down and stuff like that. And you almost feel like there's a level of market timing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
It's true.
Yeah. It's weird, but yeah.
And that was no fun. I didn't like doing the optimization stuff. I'm like, I want to create something new. I want to build something from scratch. So for me, it was like a psychological thing where I was like, yeah, I'd rather write this new thing rather than revisit this old thing. So
yeah. I totally get it. I have more ideas than time.
yes.
Like, it's funny because a lot of people are like, well, if you're going to write 3 articles, what are you going to write about? I'm like, you'd be shocked. It's
Not
like, I don't have a problem of ideas. I have a problem of time.
Totally. I don't have a problem with ideas. I have a problem with knowing what ideas are good ideas, maybe. So it's like, give me 3 things to write, and I'll write 3 of them, but I won't be able to tell you which one's going to take off out of the 3.
Yeah.
And so that was the case at Buffer, at least. Like, we were. I shouldn't say we weren't. It sounded like we weren't strategic about it, but there's so many outside factors in how these things go sometimes, where we couldn't fully predict. Where we would land with some of the content ideas we come up with.
All right. So the next habit of highly ineffective marketers is social media. What do you got for me?
I could talk for days about ineffective social media tactics. I've done them all, and we saw a lot of them at Buffer. I think for me, social media has evolved so much over the last 10 years, last 1 year, even. Like it moves so fast, and so I think one of the mistakes that I've seen is you're not adapting your social media strategy to fit the way that social media is working today. And so an example of that at Buffer, I think we saw a lot of our users and even us as a company, like you would post something to Twitter once and it would do great. And so you would post it again like every couple of weeks for months on end until it stopped doing great. And that's not the way that Twitter is used anymore, and it hasn't been for quite a while, but those tactics, some of those do still last. Like I still get mentioned on Twitter for articles that I've written, and like I've seen that same tweet 4 or 5 times. It's an automated process, and I know social media is trying to remove some of that, but I think that's an example of ways that you haven't fully adapted to fit the way social works today. I think on Instagram, for instance, you see like the stories, for instance, is something that seems like it's been around forever, but some companies are still not using it in a way that could be really effective for them. They're using the feed in the way that people are using stories now. And so understanding the differences between the different tools within each system, understanding how your audience communicates, I think is a really important thing to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I find that when I go and we sell social media through, we do a comprehensive approach, but social media is part of it. It's like I find that my clients only want to focus on the social media platform that they actually use.
Yes.
And I'm just like, you know what I mean?
Because they know it best.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's one of those things where I find so much of my time in the social media part of the argument is educating them on how social media actually works. Because what you see as just a consumer of content is very different from the tactics you got to use to actually use social media to advance your brand. You know what I mean? Like it's a very different animal. And I'm like, I need you to I need you to unlearn what you know to learn. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we talked about data earlier. And I think that's one of the big learnings for me is that you can use data to inform your social media strategy, but like where you are on social.
Yep.
Like you can look at where are your competitors on social media, like where does your audience hang out, where are the people and personas that you're trying to target, rather than, to your point, the one that you know best or the one that you like the most.
Sure.
I think there's definitely a case for testing into different channels. Like I know TikTok is one that a lot of businesses are curious about today, and spend 10% of your time testing into that. But there's probably a core 1 to 2 channels that's going to be where you're most inclined to be. I think for us, we've also seen it shift quite a bit from a channel that you use to drive clicks and to drive traffic to your site to more of a place where you build community and you build a brand. And I think that's been a big shift. If you want the clicks, if you want the traffic, like you have to pay to play more or less in that regard. But it's still a really valuable channel for building that brand and building like awareness for what you're offering and creating connection with people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that I've always been kind of nervous of is that you're in this spot where when I explain it to clients, they just view it as a megaphone. I'm like, no, it's a telephone. All right. You know what I mean? It's not a one-way communication.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. It's like, it's not one to many, it's one to one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think that one of the things that, did you ever get to meet Mark Schaefer?
I saw him, but I've not talked to him before. But yeah, I've heard a lot of his stuff
real
before.
good dude. I had him on 3 weeks ago, and he has this thing that he would call it's like as opposed to B2C and B2B and B2C, he talks about B2P. I think I'm saying it right, but it's like business to person. And what that really means is that we think that in the business to business approach to social media, right, that oh, you know what? They're never going to buy from that platform. They're never going to buy my products and services from Facebook. And they're like, no, they're not. But you know what? That person that does buy your products, he has a real life in the real world, and he goes to Facebook to live. And so if you advertise in places and he already knows your brand and you stay top of mind, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where you reach them where they're at as opposed to where you think, you know what I mean? Like, Is their intent different on LinkedIn? Possibly. But if they've already seen your brand and your products, they're not going to be like, well, I don't care anymore because I'm in Facebook world right now. I'm like, no, that's not how they think. They're still just a person. It's still made of people doing real things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the ROI conversation is hard on social media, and so like if that's the mindset you're taking, that's maybe a mistake that I've learned is you can't be really hard ROI driven when it comes to social media. You have to consider the brand and the halo effect of all that effort, and you may see it like through some of your attribution if you have that level of accuracy or discipline there, but more or less it's a channel you kind of commit to knowing that it's going to have this larger effect on things.
Yeah, so one of the benefits of what we do is we rely on HubSpot, and HubSpot can track the origin of your journey from certain social media profiles.
That's great.
So that's you know what I mean? That if you add that element, that's where social media, there's a level of transparency that can come. So I can, to better explain this, I can say, hey, you know what? This person that converted started at a Facebook ad, came to my website, watched this video, got these 2 drip marketing emails, and then now he's converted. And so now I'm looking at the ideal customer journey, and I'm saying, in the ideal sense, not the ideal sense, in the average sense, it's taking about anywhere between 4 to 6 touches to convert. You know what I mean? So these are the people these are the people that are in your database, and they've only touched 3 out of 6. So it doesn't mean that they're not buyers. It means it's possible they just haven't bought yet.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? So
it's like magic. we didn't have that 5 or 10 years ago.
I know. Yeah. I mean, it is weird. Yeah, but it is weird how I know for a fact that these companies are not just going to be like, I'm going to do something really righteous here and create a cookieless world. Yeah. There's got to be something coming, because all of what I just explained to you, these companies aren't going to just let it go and just be like, I believe in privacy more than profit. I'm like, I don't think you do. So what do you think? That's where the rubber hits
the road, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we saw that with the Facebook ad boycott last year. It's like, they're these brands are not on there, or people are talking about not spending on Facebook. But then how long does that last? Or how much are they actually going to withdraw? Like, where are they at today? Like, how much did our world actually change from that? Like, I think it's a very interesting. It's almost like a game of chicken in a way. It's like who's going to blink first with some of the stuff, and unfortunately, a lot of times, marketers or companies are the ones that blink in that case.
Yeah, but what I find though, and I've said this same argument to almost everybody that I can, is that Apple does a PR campaign with this whole privacy update, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we think we want privacy. In other words, like I know I'm not saying we don't, but just humor me here. But we also want the latest, greatest iPhone. Well, the iPhone is just a box, and the new box is just a faster computer. But when you take away all the tracking and all that stuff, what you're doing is you're making your machine dumber. Because it was the tracking that allowed them to predict what you liked, when you liked it, when you wanted to hear, things that you didn't know. All these other brands were getting in front of you. Now you have to go research that on your own. So if I'm looking for a new washing machine, it's not going to be any fun for me to get ads from a bow and arrow company or something like that. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, it's like personalization versus privacy. Yeah. Yep.
The iPhone doesn't do that by default. It only works because you allowed that device and the websites to track you. So we thought we want privacy, but it's never advertised as your device is now dumber.
There's no like pro privacy or pro non privacy marketing. Maybe that's what we need. Is like the other side of it. It's like all the companies not focusing on privacy need to have that, like the flip side of the conversation. Because you're right, that doesn't get talked about really often. It's not safe to talk about that. I don't think. I know. Brand risk in talking about that side of things. So. Yeah,
but I mean, it is true. I mean, like you weren't sitting outside of the Apple store in the freezing cold to get a faster machine. I don't think you were. I mean, maybe a little bit better camera. Yeah. But we were in the back of our mind. We wanted a smarter device, an intuitive device.
It's funny how like the world that we create, we don't really realize what world we're creating when we're creating it. Like, a year from now, we could all be watching YouTube and getting the most random ads before every video that we watch. And like, to your point, it's because we all thought privacy was the most important thing. Yeah. Today.
I allow every app that comes up says, you want to be tracked? I'm like, yep. I do. I don't care.
Good for you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying it's less research I have to do.
It's true. Yeah. I do it about 50% of the time. I'm like, if I think they'll show me cool ads, I'm here for it. I'll do it. If I don't think they'll show me cool ads, I'm like, I'd rather not. So maybe it's the control. Maybe I crave control, even though most of the time I still give up all my information.
Yeah. I totally get it. Now, what is funny though, and I don't have this screen, and I'll see if I can maybe do this in post-production, is that everything Facebook did and all these other apps on the iPhone, it says, do you want them to track you? Mm-hmm. And you're like, the average consumer's like, no, that's so wrong. I want my privacy. So they click, don't track me. But then when I got the iPhone 13, when I went into the App Store for the first time, guess what the pop-up said?
Probably not that.
Would you like personalized ads based upon your interests?
There it is.
So everybody else is, do you want to be tracked by the evil system that is going to spy on every move that you do and you'll always be their slave? Or in my App Store, would you like personalized ads that should make your life better?
Yeah.
It's such a crock.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's not right. Yeah. Or it's good marketing. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Good messaging.
Yeah. All right, two more. I'm just like looking. Yeah, I think we have enough time to get through the next two. The next habit of highly ineffective digital marketers is video. Tell me, where do people go wrong with video?
I mean, from what we've seen, it's often not focusing on those first 5 seconds, maybe even 3 seconds or 1 second of a video, because that's going to be really your hook and the chance you have to sell people on watching the rest. And so monitoring your data there, seeing the drop-off rates, but even knowing that going into the creation of the video, like make sure you front load it with something engaging, something to capture attention. Yeah. So that's really key for us. I think the other thing we saw then is at Buffer, we ran a study on square video versus landscape video versus portrait and which ones tend to do best. And so understanding what does work best, like that was a few years ago. I think the takeaway then was that square or portrait would typically work best on social media. But understanding the way that you're creating video and where you're delivering it is really important. Like if you're doing an audio, like if you're turning this this chat into a video where our faces are side by side, and someone's watching it on, I don't know, like Instagram TV or something like that, and all they can see is like like your right ear and my left ear. Like that's not going to be a great experience. And so you got to kind of think about the medium in which you're sharing your video as well.
Oh, how about that? You know what? I've never really even thought about that until you just brought it up. How about that? Yeah.
It's interesting. There's so many cool tools that like will crop it for you, or they'll give you a way to reorient it. But they've made that a lot easier. I think it was worse a couple of years ago where you'd have to hop into After Effects and like edit the whole thing again. But it is important to consider just from that, again, like thinking of the user experience.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things that's interesting, where I believe that a big problem is that when people basically try to implement video, they either don't value that on your homepage. You want to have your highest production value video that's going to make a really great argument that's going to establish you as a professional and do all those things, right? So my argument is that's where you actually invest on a video. The other video throughout your website, maybe on your product pages you also do high quality video, but when you're communicating with blogs and social media and stuff like that, especially in a world of COVID, nobody cares about the production value anymore. As long as your content is really good. Do you know what I mean? Like you right now, like I guess that's not your office, right? You're at home, right?
I'm at home, yeah.
Yeah. I have no problem whatsoever just like looking at you and your backdrop as your home. But like 3 years ago, that wasn't the case. Like in other words, like
I needed a studio back here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So what I'm saying is like don't wait to be perfect to create video. All right? If you've got good content, like make mistakes and don't worry about the aesthetics and stuff like that. Like just focus on creating really great content. And then as many videos as you can create to humanize your brand and do all those things. Like I'm going to be honest, man, I have an SLR camera that's not nearly as good as my iPhone 13 camera. It's crazy, right?
Yeah. We have access to so many powerful things today in our pockets. Yeah.
So you bought a phone and I can buy a $12 microphone off of Amazon, and I could be the next internet superstar off of a $12 microphone. You know what I mean?
Get yourself a ring light and a tripod, and you're good to go.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of social media has normalized that too. Like TikTok, for instance, is a video, obviously a video first platform, but it's people, shooting video in their bedrooms and things like that. Like we're very used to that. Now, I think previously it was, everything was on TV or like premium video, and that's not the case anymore. So don't let it be an obstacle for things. I think the other thing that we've seen with video is that it's great to humanize your brand through video. So put people on it, get to know your team, and then on the product side, it's a really useful way to show off how your product works. And so one thing that's been big for me and all the companies I've worked at is this idea of product-led growth, where you expose the value of the product as soon as possible, so that the user can kind of understand what they're getting. And if you don't have that naturally within your product, like if it's, I know at Oyster, for instance, in order to really realize the value of our product, you have to hire someone like onto your team. And so like, you're not going to show up to Oyster today and just be like, here's a hire button, I'm going to click it. But so what we can do instead is then use video to kind of highlight the value in a way. And so, pull product UI into the video, show some user flows and kind of what people will end up getting once they hop in. And it's a great way to kind of shortcut that buyer process because they get to see that value up front.
Yeah. Now what we were doing is we call them asset pages, and we call them asset because these videos can be used as an asset in other places. But what I would do is, when I was mentioning that quasi before, questions with answers and simple information, I used to create these asset pages. And I used to find one critical argument, and then I would break that argument into maybe 5 or 6 different videos that people could watch. And so it was almost like if my website totally disappeared, at the end of the day, you're going to find out everything that you needed from this one page website. It wasn't a landing page, but it was just called an asset page. Because there was an article from Gartner that basically was like, they were describing it as like the idea, the concept of, imagine your website is really good, but then it's really big. And because it's really big, the critical things that have to be found actually just feel like if you drop someone off at the front door of a mall and said, there's a really great store in there, just go and find it. They are in the mall, but are they going to find the right information at the right time? It's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
But when we share our information, sometimes we just share our homepage link and say like, all right, you know what I mean?
You just share a kiosk so they know
Exactly.
where to go.
Exactly. So an asset page in theory is like, let's pretend like the rest of your website didn't exist. Let's answer every question right here on this page.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that is fun, that's kind of a buzzworthy thing. You know how TikTok has that endless scroll thing with video? So I don't know that you've seen this or not, but if you go to, I think it's called Shorts on YouTube. They're called YouTube Shorts.
Okay, yeah.
That's them trying to compete with TikTok. But here's the deal. If you are on YouTube and you're in the Shorts thing, if you close YouTube, like you swipe up, the next time you open up YouTube, you'll be back in the Shorts section of YouTube, as opposed to the homepage of YouTube. So what they were saying in this article is that they're just losing time on page to TikTok, and what they're trying to do is saying like, how do we create endless scrolling?
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, I think of YouTube totally different than TikTok.
Yeah, me too.
In a way,
me too.
Like, I watch 5, 6, 7 minute videos on YouTube. I would never want to do that on TikTok. So it's fascinating.
It is one of those things that I just wonder whether they're just catering to an audience that's found a way to stay on the page longer, and they said, you know what, like we just got to just measure different tactics for different audiences. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the longer you stay on a page, the more videos you watch, the more ads you can put between videos. So maybe there's something to it there as well.
Yeah. But I still don't understand how they're monetizing off Shorts, because I don't see them squeeze. Well, you know what? I could be wrong though, because do you have YouTube Premium or do you have just standard YouTube?
Standard, yeah.
That's actually, as owning an agency, I'm actually at a disadvantage because I use YouTube Premium, so there's no ads.
Oh.
But it's a little bit of a problem because I need to see where I'm being interrupted so that I can interrupt other people better for my clients.
Let's do the dog food a little bit. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't have YouTube on my mobile device, and so I haven't seen the Shorts in the same way I use YouTube on an iPad. But I mean, there's a lot of ads there today, but it is very interruptive. Like if you're watching a 10-minute video and there's like mid-roll ads, like those are not a great user experience. But on TikTok, like going from one to the next, you watch 2 seconds of an ad and you can swipe up or down if you want to keep it. Is a much better experience. So I'm sure there's some sort of advertising and demographic play that YouTube's trying to go for. Yeah,
I mean, I'm fascinated by all that stuff about the little idiosyncrasies that they're doing to the usability. You know what I mean? It's just it's crazy. I would love to kind of be a fly on the wall in one of those rooms, and they're just.
Wouldn't that be fascinating?
Yeah, it'd be awesome. It'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Now the final thing here is the last habit. There's tons more habits than 7, guys, but I can't cash in on the 7 habits of highly effective people if I create 8. It's going to be weird. So the last one is analytics. What do you find when you think about ineffective marketing and you think of analytics? What comes to mind?
Yeah, 2 things come to mind at first. I think one of them is there's so many different metrics to look at. So one of the ineffective ways is to look at all the metrics. Even though that seems like the right thing to do, I think oftentimes you struggle then to pull signal out of the noise when you're looking at too many things. So that's one thing that has tripped me up in the past. I think the other thing is making sure you're looking at the right metrics, which feels it sounds easy, but I found it to be a lot harder than it sounds. So the saying I think is what gets measured gets moved, and it's very true. Like the thing that you're looking at is going to be, especially if you're leading a team or leading a strategy, like the thing you choose to look at is going to be what your team actions on and what you work toward, and hopefully you've chosen the right thing in a way. And so, for instance, at Buffer, we at one time optimized for email signups, so building our newsletter list, and moved all the CTAs to email. Drove a ton of email signups through it, which was fantastic. But we did that at the expense of driving signups from content. So you have to understand that's the trade-off that you make. Same thing, like when you think about maybe a content strategy overall, you're optimizing for sessions or you're optimizing for time on page. Like that's going to dictate your strategy to a large degree. Like, are you going for volume or are you going for experience or engagement? And so I think from the analytics side, like understanding, like don't look at everything, but be very, very careful about the things that you do look at, because the things you look at are going to drive the behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think this is a double-edged sword, but you have all that content with analytics and stuff like that. We use HubSpot on top of Google Analytics, and we use some other things too for social media monitoring, all of that stuff. But what I usually find is that I try to find one or two KPIs rather than knowing all my data in every screen all the time everywhere. I find that if I can hone in on maybe 2 or 3 goals or KPIs or something like that, all the other stuff I'm still looking at, but I want to be able to leave a report with actionable items or say that I learned something. If it's just so much data, like I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like you'll have death by data. You know what I mean? And you can't fix everything. You know what I mean? But I try to set up our reports so that literally it like puts up little caution alarms if I can find somewhere in the data where I'm bleeding. You know what I mean? But I always just try to break it down to just certain KPIs, and it varies from client to client. But I just want to know certain things. Like a lot of times for me, because we have cookie technology with HubSpot and stuff like that, I care more about returning audience than I do about new audience.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of our clients don't have products and services that people buy on the first. They don't just go to your website and buy right away.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I'm trying to see how many people can I get back. You know?
That's great. And to your point, like that's important then which metric you choose, because if you're choosing total new visitors, that's going to totally change your strategy. Yep. And it's probably not going to lead to the business outcome that you want. So understanding that insight of like, actually, this is the thing that moves the needle for the business. Let's figure out the right metrics to attach to that. I think is a great way to go.
Yeah. But that's the thing is I say like build your analytics and find your system, but know your KPI. Try, and sit in a room and say, hey, is that KPI, like, is that a really good KPI that, or where does it break down? In other words, believe in it, but don't believe in it. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know. I use an example of like calories. Like, you know how like we live in this world that's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to a restaurant and it's going to tell me the calories that are up there. Like any dietitian, like major dietitians don't worry about calories. Now they still talk about calories, right? But there's not one global number that answers all the reason why people gain weight. You know what I mean? Certain people at certain times, they don't respond to carbs as well as others. They don't, how much water are you drinking? How much salt are you intaking? All the stuff like that. All of that stuff isn't answered by one significant number called calories. But the reason why calories bring value to the world is because nobody has time to do the math on all the other stuff. You know what I mean?
It's simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's simple and evident.
But
I think for us,
good dietitians say, look, I'm going to break it down and I'm going to say, I'm going to really worry about carbs for you, or I'm really going to worry about this or that. So rather than looking at a global number, we're still going to care about a couple things, but
that's
you don't
great.
have to know
Same
that.
thing with business then. Like not every business cares about total sessions to your site or these well-known metrics. I think for us at the companies I've been at, I try to take a perspective of being data informed rather than data driven. I think like if you're only making decisions based on data, that's kind of my definition for data driven.
Okay.
I think you kind of expose yourself to some risk because essentially data is only as good as the questions that you ask of it. So, if you take a number like win rate, for instance, if you're looking at win rate and it is something that you want to move, like, what are you really asking of that win rate? Are you taking into account the audience that you're targeting with that win rate? Like maybe your win rate is great among your ideal customer profile and is awful against all these folks that are outside of your core personas. Like that would be a useful insight to know. But if you're only building off of this one metric and totally driven by that, you don't take into account these other things. And so I think it's using data to inform a strategy rather than to drive a strategy. Like data is one input.
Wow.
One of many inputs. I think it's a much more holistic way to approach it from what we've seen in places like that.
Well, that stinks for me because I say I say
I mean,
all the time,
it's semantics probably, right?
I want you to be a data-driven company. But no, you did explain it perfectly. I don't think when I say data driven, I actually mean what you said on data.
Yes. That's why I think it's semantics. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think as long as you define it, what you mean when you say it, I think it's
Yeah.
great. But I think there is a distinction between only acting based on data versus using data to inform
Sure.
a decision. So
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. This is great. Hey, Kev, we got through all 7. We were
look at us
talking before
go.
the show. I'm like, this could be a 4-hour podcast. You ready?
Plus, you
Yeah.
answered the door. Yeah.
Yeah,
We did great.
exactly.
We were efficient.
No, this was great though, Kevin. So, I want to thank you for jumping on. I saw you on Pam Didner's podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, that guy is really, really smart, and you absolutely
thank you.
delivered today. Yeah.
I mean, I think Pam makes people sound smart. So you and Pam are similar in that way. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. Yeah, this has been wonderful, and I would love to check back with you and just see all the things you're doing at Oyster, and just as your career goes on, I'd love to have you back because I think you're a big. Thank you. You're a big shot in this industry. I think you're a bright star. I think
thank you.
One of the things I'd love to kind of see in the future is like now that you've seen things from the buffer side and you're seeing things from the oyster side, stuff like that. You're seeing certain things at the not what's it what where the boots meet the where the oh man I forget what it is. Where the rubber meets the road. You know what I mean? What I find a lot of times is that I read blogs and stuff like that, and it's just like, I get the theory, but these aren't the people anymore that are like literally seeing it in action. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, not to sound negative on the guy, but like Neil Patel, he doesn't entirely live in the real world. So his blogs, are like, oh, I did this and I had a 40% increase. I was like, yeah, you have a list of 2 million people.
Exactly.
Everyone else has a list of 2,000.
Yeah,
so,
there's like theory and practice, and there's like established versus building from scratch too. Like there's different modalities to it that it's useful to hear that perspective from, for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, when you were a buffer and you were the 7th employee, the lessons you learned there are very different from, I don't know how established Oyster was when you started working there, but
Well, I mean, Oyster was, I was like 70 or 80 here, and we're close to 300 now, and so even seeing like the difference between that and now is completely stark. So there's a lot of learnings for sure. Happy to jump on anytime, and would love to stay in touch on all this.
Yeah, that would be great. So thank you again for your time. To my listeners, I want to make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification. It is my job and my mission to find some of the best thought leaders in the world of marketing and bring them to you to basically give you all the information that we've been fortunate enough to kind of like uncover from ourselves by just kind of being in the dirt every day and just figuring out for our clients and for our companies just sort of what's going on. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.